Welcome to What Would Sabrina Say? I'm Sabrina Dong, and I'm excited you're joining me today. In this podcast, I dive into mental health topics on relationships, and overall well-being. With over 20 years of experience as a licensed clinical social worker, I share insights and invite expert guests who are passionate about making a positive difference. I started this podcast because I was frustrated with the often misleading or recycled information in social media involving self-help and the mental health field. My goal is to provide you with genuine, useful content that's educational and informative. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you find our conversations both enlightening and empowering. I'm glad you're here. Hi, welcome to the podcast, What Would Sabrina Say? I'm your host, Sabrina Dong, licensed clinical social worker. Today with me, we have Michelle Giannotto, Vice President, Patient Advocate for Auto Brewery Syndrome Information and Research, a nonprofit. Thank you so much, Michelle, for joining me today.
Oh, you're welcome. Love to be here.
I'm just wondering if there's anything else you'd like to share about your role and the nonprofit with our audience before we jump into what Auto Brewery Syndrome is.
My role with the nonprofit, it's a strictly volunteer position where I help others who may be suffering with this rare disease to navigate how to find help, how to understand their symptoms, and how to get proper treatment and guide them best I can from the information that we have available to get a diagnosis and treatment. I can't give you the exact date when the nonprofit started, but I could certainly give you our history. Barbara Cordell, who's the president of the nonprofit, I met her when I needed some information about this disease. I reached out to her, and she had experienced being in the shoes of a caretaker when her husband developed the same disease. So she and I bonded immediately, and she helped carry me through the questions and the stress that I had around this disease. It was then she asked me what I thought about starting a nonprofit, and I said, okay. And I had asked her, what do you want me to do? And she said, the same thing you're doing now. Just keep being a advocate, speaking to patients and helping them. And I said, let's do it. So the nonprofit was formed, and here we are.
And that's amazing to hear that from advocacy in your grief, you turn it into a nonprofit to help other people. Because sometimes people feel things are so much bigger than they are, or that there's no way to find support. And it sounds like the two of you turn this into something to help others.
Yes, that was our goal. Because this disease was so rare and no one ever heard of it, we had each other and we had our own struggles finding help. So our goal was to bring more awareness and not let anyone go through what we went through trying to navigate help on our own.
Right, because navigating the healthcare system, especially when it's such a diagnosis that's not always heard of, that can be so grueling and such a stressful thing on families to do.
Exactly, yes.
I was wondering if you could share what Auto Brewery Syndrome is and what the symptoms are.
Auto Brewery Syndrome, in its simplest explanation, is when the human body converts the carbohydrates that you eat to alcohol. There's a fermentation process that gets initiated when simple carbs are introduced in your diet, whether it be something as simple as potatoes, corn, carrots, bread, any kind of refined sugar, fruit. And the body has an overgrowth of fermenting yeast or bacteria anywhere from inside your oral cavity to your upper or lower intestines, or even in your bladder. And those carbohydrates will ferment sometimes as much as 3 to 4 times the legal limit. So it's not unheard of for a person who has this condition to present in the emergency room with an alcohol or ethanol level of 300-400. Some of the symptoms are, so there's symptoms that are observed, right, which would be the same as if someone had consumed alcohol. So you would have unsteady on your feet. You may have slurred speech. Your eyes will be blinking slowly. You would have an odor of alcohol coming from your body. And then there's the physical, which is, when I say physical, if you present in the emergency department and you're having a seizure, that's usually the body going through alcohol withdrawal. And as a matter of diagnostic testing, the emergency department may do a blood draw and test for drugs and alcohol to find out what's going on. And the patient will have high levels of ethanol. And the patient would deny consuming any alcoholic beverages. Most of the time, they're admitting not drinking is not believed because the body presents exactly the same as if someone were to consume alcohol.
Wow. So they would experience those exact same symptoms as
Yes.
drinking, and can appreciate how confusing that might be presenting day to day with those symptoms when you're not somebody who consumes alcohol.
And even if you did have Auto Brewery and you didn't know it, and you had, let's say, a glass of wine with dinner, it would further drive that ethanol level up. It would be the same as throwing gasoline on an already burning fire. So instead of having that one drink, it'll look like you had 10 drinks.
So just that extreme difference because your body's sort of like producing it already on its own because of the yeah immune issue.
Right, right. And alcohol, when consumed, is also considered a simple sugar. And
Right.
there's alcohol in the beverage. So,
Double. And then if you have in your meal like carbs or dessert, like that's just spiking it even more.
right. And most people don't realize they have it. It's when they get in their car to drive home and they get pulled over and arrested for a DUI.
So that can impact your life with that charge or that
Yeah.
scary experience.
Right. So you could lose your job if you have a job where you require a clean driving record. If you have a job that you operate a company vehicle, if you're a driver as part of your job. And, imagine the confusion of someone who's driving home from dinner that didn't have that one glass of wine. They just ate carbs. And now they're sitting on the side of the road trying to figure out, why does this policeman or policewoman think that I had something to drink, and they're completely confused. And now they're having to spend anywhere from $6,000 and above for their legal defense.
Wow. That's quite expensive.
Yes, it is. We've had people in our group have to go to trial to stay out of jail and pay upwards of 30, 60, 100,000.
That's a lot of money just to explain and show that you have a medical condition to speak for the reasons that you had the DUI.
And a lot of cities and states in the United States and some counties don't recognize this yet as a medical condition, and you may not be allowed to use it as a legal defense, even if you have the proof that you have this condition with proper testing in a supervised environment.
Wow. That's really surprising because it is a medical condition.
Yeah, you're right.
So you're left resorted to not being able to drive then.
Or being incarcerated.
So what other issues do people run into? What is it like for those suffering with this illness?
Well, there's two. We have a support group on Facebook for this condition that people can join if they suspect they have it. There's an information group if they just want to get information. But we support both the caretakers, which is usually a close family member or a friend. And we also welcome the people who have the disease because they're both struggling in different ways. And some of the families that I've spoken to, both the caretaker and the person with, I'll say ABS, Auto Brewery, they suffer with anxiety and they've been diagnosed with PTSD. They suffer from depression. They are struggling with their family and friends who don't believe that this condition exists, and they're being accused of being a closet alcoholic, and the caretaker is just an enabler. I was accused by family of being a dummy. How did I not see that my husband wasn't this closet alcoholic? So it becomes quite frustrating. And a lot of caretakers and people with this disease are trying so hard to convince these people it's true. And it's difficult for them because they're just kind of spinning their wheels for a lot of these people that just are not going to support what they're saying.
Right. And understanding or believing, right, that addiction is another type of illness, but that has to do with something totally different. What are some barriers and challenges to seeking out services?
Well, just like family and friends may not believe and have never heard of it, it's kind of new and emerging for doctors as well. You go to your doctor and you say, "Hey, listen, I get drunk when I'm drinking." A lot of caretakers, and especially the patient, they're told, "Oh, that's too rare. There's no possibility that you could have it." So part of our nonprofit group is to arm the patients and the caretakers with the tools. And what are the tools? One of the tools is buy a breath alcohol meter. Keep a log, a diary of the things you eat and things you drink, and blow hourly. This way you could be a little bit more intelligent when you speak to your doctor and say, "Hey, wait a minute. No, I've done the work. I've spoken to the nonprofit. I bought the breath alcohol meter. I've taken a stool test and it is showing I have gut dysbiosis." So we teach them like how to communicate with doctors. And even with that, I hate to say it, but some of our medical community continues to gaslight the patient. And gaslighting is a big problem. So we help the patient and their caretaker how to address the gaslighting. So finding a doctor that knows about the condition is impossible. Finding a doctor willing to listen is getting better because we're getting more awareness on this disease, but we're finding it's still a little difficult, even though there's more, information out there, and a doctor can Google it if they wanted to, and they would find our nonprofit website with all the case studies. But a lot of the things that the caretakers and people with ABS get frustrated with is the lack of care. Finding that doctor, getting the doctor to believe them, giving them a referral to, the right doctors, and even the right doctors, right? It's in the wheelhouse of infectious disease and gastroenterology. A lot of them don't want to deal with Auto Brewery, even though this is their wheelhouse. There are some who jump on board and say, "Wow, this is interesting. I'd love to learn about this. I'll take this case on." And there are more that say, "No, this is not what they do."
Right, so it sounds like barriers and challenges are because of the lack of knowledge and information that not only, like you said, families or caregivers have access to, but also the medical field, healthcare.
And to circle back about getting arrested for a DUI, the one thing an attorney needs to defend you is a medical diagnosis. So if you can't get diagnosed, you don't have a defense.
Right. You don't have an illness.
Right. And it's a catch-22. I mean, I was there. My husband, that's how we realized my husband had it. He was arrested for a DUI. And did he drink that morning when we left the house? No. Did we drink other times socially? Yes, but not that morning. And we had to seek a doctor to do the testing to prove that he had it. Thankfully, we found a really good team. But the stress, the anxiety, the financial strain, our doctors never heard of it. Our doctor said, "I've been in practice 55 years. I've never heard of this." And I thought, "Oh my God, we just got down another empty path." But he said, "No, but I'm going to take it on." I was like, "Thank God."
And this is a large city, right? Because we're talking about New Jersey. Can you imagine if people live in rural communities or where there are lack of resources, how
You know,
hard it must be?
yeah, you bring up a very interesting point that I forgot about, and that is those in small towns, those in rural communities. They are the talk of the town. We have the town drunk. She's telling everyone, or he's telling everyone they have a rare disease. They're just a closet alcoholic, and they feel ashamed and they're hiding behind their medical condition and they're afraid to reach out to their local medical providers for help because of the fear of what someone may think.
Is
And
the stigma.
right, right.
But what was your experience like as a caregiver? I can imagine it was, you know, exhausting, burnout, like you said, experiencing PTSD, lots of medical appointments, of research, gathering documents, advocacy, caring for your husband as well.
I was lucky in that my cousin and his wife were doctors. So my cousin is an ER doctor, his wife is chief of palliative care. And when they saw my husband, they immediately said, "What happened to him?" And I said, "I don't know. You guys are the doctors. You tell me. This is what's going on." And then when I told them about being arrested for a DUI, they told me to look up Auto Brewery Syndrome. I have never heard of it. So we Googled it and then we started down the path of, okay, buy the breath alcohol meter. Let's call the doctors. Let's get tested. After, we had a great team of doctors because he was already so sick for 14 months. The doctor said these symptoms kind of add up. Let's get him tested. So then my husband got diagnosed immediately. Within 1 hour, his blood alcohol went from 0 to 0.19, which is, 2.5 times the legal limit. And I thought, wow, this is going to be easy. We live in the tri-state area. We could just, if we fall in any direction, we'll end up in a doctor's office. And it wasn't that easy. We called 106 doctors across the United States, and every single one of them turned us away. So for the patient, my husband, he was depressed. He was angry. He was constantly suffering with high ethanol levels. He was stressed out. He couldn't go to work. He couldn't drive to work. He couldn't perform when he was at work. And we didn't realize how important diet was at the time. Meanwhile, because he was sick, I wouldn't give up. I was going to shake that tree until a nut fell out. I was so determined. And we finally did find a doctor. But even then, it was very stressful. You're on pins and needles. Is this it? Is this going to work? Are they going to find, how to reverse this? Is this going to last? Can we keep our jobs? You talk about the people who do lose their jobs, they lose their medical benefits too. So now you can't afford to get the care. So there's always this constant fear and anxiety and stress. And it's not day to day, every day, all day long, 24/7. And I don't even know how I got a night's sleep the whole year, the whole 5 years that my husband was sick.
Constant care, probably going to emergency. It's the only
My
way of
husband
getting
went to the ER 38 times.
38 times the expense probably each time.
Our out-of-pocket medical bills after 2 PPO medical plans for copays, travel, and coinsurance, our out-of-pocket medical bills exceeded $85,000. Any money we had to buy a home went right out the window. So there was no, we couldn't go on vacation. We couldn't plan our life. It was literally day to day. And I would leave him home to go grocery shopping, and I would be walking around the grocery store with tears literally running down my face, shaking. And thank God the shopping cart had wheels because that's what I used as my walker to get around the grocery store. And, people would look at me and you could see the look on their face. Do they want to help? They look like they want to run up to me and say, "What's wrong? Can I help you?" But I just needed to be able to buy one day's worth of groceries. I couldn't buy 3 or 4 days or a week's worth because the trauma and the stress of caretaking, I could only buy a few meals and leave.
Just, yeah, because you're focused on the moment or lack of sleep. You're probably not eating well too at that point, and the strength needed to carry on each day, Michelle, I can imagine that'd be very hard.
Yeah, and he was sick every day too. I mean,
Mhm.
he was vomiting 6 to 8 times a day, and, he couldn't feel when it was gonna come on, and he was sick all of the time, and he also had type 2 diabetes, and that did not help the diabetes because anyone with type 2 diabetes knows that when that blood sugar goes really, really low, what do you need to bring that glucose? You need sugar.
And that creates the alcohol issue even
Correct.
more.
So it was a constant catch-22.
Wow. I can't imagine the stress. And at the time, what was there supports? I know we want to talk about like the importance of supports for patients, for caregivers going through this.
Well, support caregivers and for people with Auto Brewery, we do have the Facebook support group. We only allow those who are either a caretaker for someone with the disease or someone with ABS to join the group. And there's an entire community of people that are in that support group. We have up to now 1,300 people that are active in the group and help one another. And not everyone is still sick. They stay to help others. So they've been reversed, they're doing well, and they just want to help others. And it's a real relief for someone to be able to be in an environment where they could feel safe to share and be supported and have others chime in and say, yes, I understand. I had that too, or I've gone through that. And then some will come in and say, well, how did you get through that? What were your tricks? One thing I'm a big advocate for is anyone that is a caretaker or someone with this disease, reach out to your therapist, your social worker, a support group. My husband and I, we had two on speed dial. We would go together and then we'd go separately to see someone to talk about the stress. And, we had family members that didn't believe that he was sick. And then, you know, people in our group, they ask, does it help? Yeah, it does help because it gives you coping strategies, breathing techniques, books to read, and it also destroys marriages. So you have the stress within the relationship. My husband and I don't want to say we didn't have a stress in our marriage like, oh, we were going to end. No, it was more about, I don't know how to help you. And he didn't know how to not be sick because he would see me cry, but he wanted me not to cry. So
You
he
don't want
was
to be a burden.
right, right. So, you have that guilt. You have that, the people who have this disease feel guilty. They feel like you said, a burden. A lot of them say things like, I should just remove myself. You should leave me. I just should just kill myself so you don't have to deal with this. And those are difficult things to hear as a caretaker.
Definitely. And, go to therapy and have that space to talk about these things and to talk about, your feelings you may not want to share or show, right? Like frustration or anger or sadness, because each person wants to be strong for the other and feels like they can't open up or share too.
Right. Right. And you know what? It's the negative connotation to alcohol because especially if someone hasn't heard of the disease, they have no idea what it's like. And one of the most difficult things and a trigger for people with ABS is, when they're telling someone, hey, I was diagnosed with this condition, or I think I have this condition. If I eat that piece of fruit, I'm going to be 3 times the legal limit. Some people's reactions are, wow, you must save a lot of money in alcohol. That must be great. You get a buzz on a slice of pizza. You're a cheap date. That's triggering for someone with ABS. They don't see the day-to-day struggles that they have having the condition. And it's a trigger for the caretaker because they feel like the medical condition is not being validated. What they're doing is not valid. And it's like a joke. We talk about that in our support group. Hey, listen, just roll with it. People will joke about things they don't understand and it's not personal.
Right. I think it's because people, in our society don't know how to deal with that or what to say or say the right things. And it doesn't help people to feel good. And I think that's where support groups can be helpful because you have people there who understand.
Right. I mean, when people think alcohol, they think, oh, good time, party, fun. Auto Brewery is none of those things.
And I was wondering if we could talk about grief. I know in your the video you shared about your experience on this journey that your husband had passed away, and I'm so sorry about his passing into here in 2020. What was that like for you in that journey of losing a loved one to ABS?
Frustrating because it's a treatable disease. And I feel like I did so much as a caretaker and I wanted to make a difference. And I want to preface that with I don't feel like a failure. I don't feel like, I didn't do a good job. That's not what I am experiencing. But my husband died at 49 years old.
Wow, that's young.
Right. And I wasn't there. My husband, he had went to his home upstate to do some maintenance things because it was winter. It was November of 2020. I had spoken to him that morning and he said, I'm going to be home tomorrow morning. You're not even going to be out of bed and I'm going to be home. And I said, okay. And we had gone shopping the night before at the, early Christmas shopping. And he did not have the condition at the time. But what we did not know is that the alcohol had already taken a toll on his body, his liver, his heart. And, it was very difficult because one, it was a shock, a complete shock. You know, I think he passed away about an hour and 10 minutes after I hung up the phone with him that morning. But I didn't learn about his passing until later that night. It was also during COVID, so a lot of people would ask, "Oh, did he have COVID? Did you get an autopsy?" No, yes, I got an autopsy, and I know how he died, and it is what I had said. And they did put on his death certificate related to Auto Brewery, and it was healing and it was depressing because it was healing for me because I was able to speak to the coroner and the medical examiner about Auto Brewery. They have never heard of it. So it opened up a whole avenue of education to those who pass of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or people who say, oh, I don't drink, but they have the damages in their body of alcohol. So it kind of opened their minds up to this condition. And at this time, I hope at some point that takes off and more coroners and medical examiners and even the police officer who helped coordinate at the scene. He said this disease changed his life. He was a young man and he said this case, my husband's case, shook him to his core. And he went home to his wife and said, that's it. No more drinking, no more smoking. I'm getting healthy. I'm not doing this. So it was nice. I mean, it's a positive from death. Sometimes you get a positive experience. So from there, I feel grateful that I was able to help educate. But on a personal level, it's life changing. Losing your spouse, especially suddenly, where you didn't expect it, is certainly life changing, and it's changed me. It's changed my priorities. It's changed my views on life. It's changed what I see as important and not so important. And quite honestly, I did some self-reflecting and I find I have little or no patience for things that are not relevant to me or my life. And I don't have room for things that are not important. I went back to my social worker that was helping me through the ABS and she helped me through the grief. So, and I still have, I don't want to say depression. I would say moments of sadness.
Still grieving.
Right. But people say, well, the holidays must be hard. Birthdays, anniversaries, your wedding date. No, not at all. Not at all. It's the walking into getting a pedicure and watching a couple walk in because they're getting it done together. That is what makes me sad because that's something my husband and I did. He was diabetic. So I said, why don't you get your toes done by and then he went for a haircut and I got my pedicure done. We went for massages together. So if I see a couple walk in to get a couple's massage, that's triggering. So it's and every time I walk into a store and I hear our wedding song play, or I'm in the car and I hear our wedding song, those are the things that really trigger me, not anniversary dates at all.
Right. It's those memories that come up for you, enjoying your life together and, what you miss, right? They say grief is love where you don't have a place to put it, right? And so it's noticing those times and moments of love with each other and in care and in a way that's not a caregiver, right? That was causing burnout. And so you mentioned that therapy helped for, navigating different things through journey and also with the loss. I'm sure it was an extra layer involving the grief when you have friends and family who don't believe um, about the disease and making the grief complicated as well too.
Well, it's interesting. You just reminded me of two things. One, there was a family member who didn't believe that the condition existed. So invited them to come with us to the hospital to watch under supervised conditions the testing. And, on command, eat these carbs. An hour later, there was positive ethanol. And the family member was shocked. They said, "Oh my God, how did this happen?" And I had to explain, the process. And they went back to their extended family and said, "No, I seen it with my own eyes." And those other family members said, "No, you didn't understand what you saw." So there's this that I can't understand. Like that part of life I can't understand. And then you have your job. I mean, I was lucky with my husband when he went to his job and told them, "Hey, I have this disease." They looked it up and they were like, "Wow, you have this?" They had to make accommodations for him so he can keep his job, but they were supportive of it. And when you lose someone, I'm not just saying to Auto Brewery, but that's my case, someone has to be blamed for the loss. When you have a 49-year-old man that dies suddenly, I was the person they blamed. I wasn't there. I should have been there. Why did I let him travel alone? Um, they had to blame someone. I was the easiest target. I was the closest to him. That was difficult. I didn't take him to enough doctors. If I tell you that we went to 3 doctors per week on the same day, so we had FMLA and we took 1 day a week for 5 years to see 3 doctors a day. So we'd start early in the morning. We'd start with gastroenterology, then we go to infectious disease, and then after that we went to endocrinology. And then somewhere in there, sometime we squeezed in lunch, we squeezed in his primary care physician, we squeezed in a blood lab to get blood drawn, and then we went to his family member's house for dinner. We were out all day long. And a week before he died, he saw those three doctors plus another one because he had this strange looking rash on his foot. So he had 4 doctors. Then he went to the chiropractor and he told the chiropractor, "I'm having a little pain in my neck. Oh, you should get that checked out." So 4, 5 doctors a week before he died. Nobody picked anything up, but somehow it was my fault that I wasn't bringing him to the doctor enough. What's the definition of enough? We move into the hospital, make that our primary residence. What is enough in a person's mind that loses a loved one? And I became very angry.
Right. And at that time too, as you mentioned before, there was regression or relapse because there was treatment and it worked. And so at that point too, how would you know? And like you said, when dealing with lots of alcohol in the body, there's chronic issues that can come up. Uh, and sorry to hear that you were, like you said, people when they're grieving place blame somewhere and, chose to blame you at the time.
It's difficult to navigate, but I also know Nobody did the amount of work that I did. Nobody did the caretaking that I did. And I'm sorry to say, no one in his family or mine could put a candle next to the work that I did.
Oh, yeah. I'm very lucky to have you by his side for sure.
And by the way, just to circle back on the DUI, the case was dropped.
Right.
So it still cost us a few $1,000s that we did not have, but the court accepted the medical diagnosis. And the other thing, as a condition of dropping his DUI, was that we had to install in the car a ignition interlock device so that he wouldn't drive while under the influence because of the medical condition. And that's when I had an aha moment, because we were only mandated to keep it in the car for 6 months. And I said to my husband, this is not coming out. I'm leaving this thing in. So to satisfy the court, we installed the device. It's 6 months later. We called the company and we said, we want to voluntarily keep it in the car. This disease is so unpredictable. We don't know anything about it. I don't know how long he's going to stay okay when he's reversed of this condition. So we left it in the car for another 3.5 years. And that creates stress for the person with the disease, because now they're explaining to people why they're blowing into this thing to start their car.
Yeah. And like you'd mentioned, you spend a lot of time explaining to people the disease, friends, family. Mm-hmm.
And
It's
barbecues,
exhausting.
gatherings, parties, we can't eat their food. We're bringing our own food. My family was extremely supportive and they were all on board. So were our friends. If there was a party, they would say, this is our menu. And I would say, okay. And I didn't even ask permission. We just brought our own food. He had his little Tupperware, and then it was for everyone else. We made our own bread. Was it really bread? Not really, but it was bread-like, something that had 0 carbs, so he could have a hamburger with a bun. And our friends were very supportive.
It's really important is to have people around you that are supportive, whether it's a support group or friends.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could share about that support group more, if people would like to know more about it, or website, or how to reach you. You have such a wealth of information to share for families or people, where to start from: news videos, case studies, articles.
Right. So our website is autobrewery.org. And on our website is all the contact information, our medical board of directors, the volunteers that be more than happy to help anyone who reaches out. And on that website is also a list of providers that we have found that would be willing to help treat and test a patient that has auto brewery. There are also case studies that can be downloaded that anyone can just literally go on our website and look at the case studies that are public. There's also a article on the first page of our website. If you scroll all the way down, there is a scientific study that was just released in January in Nature Microbiology. That information is there for any science doctor professionals that want to read about this study. It was a 6-year study with patients that have auto brewery. So those results are now available. We have an ongoing study for using a fecal transplant for patients with auto brewery. So we have a study right now with 8 patients, and we want to expand that study, but it takes an awful lot of money to get that study off the ground. And we're all volunteers, and we are 100% dependent on donations. So we have a donate button on our website. If someone wants to just throw, $10, $25, doesn't matter. Any amount will do, because it does add up. So those donations go 100% to helping patients who are suffering with auto brewery, as well as the research study and keeping our website running. You need software to keep the website going. As far as getting help for the patients and their caretakers, again, we have the support group on Facebook. It's called Auto Brewery Support Group. And if you're looking for information, there is Auto Brewery Information Group. And we keep them separate because the support group is only for those who have it and have a caretaker that is supporting them. The information is open to anyone. If you need information, jump on, ask questions, be part of our community. That's how and we also have a newsletter. So when you go on our website, if you want to be updated with what's going on in the world of auto brewery, we're introducing new studies, new findings. We're introducing new people that are supporting us and new partnerships. We have companies that partner with us, like Intoxilock. They give us a great discount for our patients for the Ignition interlock device. We partner with a company called Tiny Health and Genova Diagnostics. They help us with the stool testing for gut health. And we also partner with Pendulum Life, who makes supplements that patients sometimes need to take to get the health of their microbiome better. So that we provide in our support group for the patients.
Wow, it's so great to have that information and access to services and to be able to work with people who at least understand about Auto Brewery Syndrome.
Yeah, we have a few veterans in our support group, and navigating sometimes through the VA can be quite difficult, but we're finding that the tide is changing across our medical community because of the support groups, because of the things like what you're doing, these podcasts and the scientific study that was released and the TV shows about auto brewery now. So people have heard of it. They have said, oh, I saw this on an episode of House, or I saw it on the Dr. Phil show. I saw it on Dr. Oz. Yeah, we're becoming more public, and more people who are suffering with this are becoming public. They're no longer allowing the stigma of alcohol to keep them from talking about it. And myself and two other members of our support group have started TikTok videos where we just talk about what our experience is like. So we're on social media as well.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for coming on today and to share your journey and your story. And I think it'll help so many others, whether they're in a caregiver role and experiencing, burnout, or someone who's going through an illness, and sharing the struggles and how people can reach out for help and support. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're
Appreciate
welcome.
your time.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Anytime.